Video camera to work.
All right, we're now on camera. So not allowed to say silly things we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, shape up. More serious now.
Can you point the camera in the other direction, Jim? Like towards Anne? She's better dressed.
Let's see. Yeah, put the tripod way up so that
Your face is towards the
Can it go up any higher? Oh, this has actually got one. That's excellent.
you're kidding.
Oh, I'm serious.
So why did
No, Helen, you're not in there.
Oh, good, not in there, leave it.
I'll hide my energy.
Okay.
Okay.
The women's commentary's in there, but you're not. All right, let's continue.
Okay. Okay. Gotta turn the page. Okay. Start with chapter 12 of Genesis. Yes. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land, and he was about to enter Egypt. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah,
Okay, hold on just a second. Famine in Israel and somebody's in Egypt.
What do you
Heard this word?
Yep,
Okay, good.
that's where we go.
That's what we do. When we have famines, God forbid, I got a lot of rain the last couple of weeks in the UK, but man, if things bad, we're going to Egypt. Okay?
So that would be like going to Detroit.
the water supply of Egypt was different from the rest of the
Absolutely.
Middle East.
Absolutely. It had the same weather patterns because it's part of this African Rift Valley, so it had the same stuff going on, but they had the Nile. And the Nile flooded, systematically, whether it rained or not, because all the, it's coming down from the middle of Africa, right? So stuff, whatever happens in Central Africa, the Nile's flood the crops, whether it rains or not. So Egypt is usually pretty well. So go to Egypt.
We should have settled there.
All right. This will be something where we want to hear the women's commentary.
Do you want me to read this now?
Let's get through the story, and then if you could sort of follow along in the comments, and then we'll finish the whole story and then see what the comments are. I'm really glad you did.
Okay, verse 11. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful the woman was. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. Because of her, it went well with Abram. He acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male and female slaves, she-asses, and camels.
Okay, now, how did he get those? That's a question. Let's keep going. What did he give them?
Because it went well.
Okay, right, but what did he give them for it to go well with him to get all this stuff? Okay. It's a valid question.
His sister.
All right, keep going with 17.
But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai, the wife of Abram. Pharaoh sent for Abram and said, What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her as my wife? Now, here is your wife. Take her and be gone. And Pharaoh put men in charge of him, and they sent him off with his wife and all that he possessed.
Okay. Apparently he got to keep all the stuff.
Yeah.
But did Sarai come out ahead is the different question.
Did you try that?
So any good stuff?
Okay, so first of all, Abram and Sarai as tricksters. That's how it starts. This section is a variant of the tale in which patriarch deceives a foreign ruler by telling him his wife is his sister. A similar episode is found twice more in Genesis, Abraham and Sarah in 21:18, and Isaac and Rebekah in 26.
There are 3 sister-wife playoffs.
The deception leads to an improvement in the trickster's status, but the deception is uncovered and they are summarily dismissed. They depart, however, with their newly acquired goods intact. The tale portrays Pharaoh as a dupe and deals with the us-them theme in a humorous and thoroughly traditional way. This passage is not a tale about unethical behavior, but a story of marginalized persons who succeed in roundabout unorthodox ways. In such stories that involve Abraham and Sarah proves to be the reason for Abraham's increased wealth. So let me just get a little bit more of what I know what a beautiful woman you are, what this is. Okay. So the biblical writer provides a reason for Pharaoh's interest in Sarai. While the Song of Songs is rich in poetic expression and admiration for the lover's physical beauty and for such overt observations about characters' beauty are limited and terse in the rest of the Bible. Their press calls special attention to the relationship between the husband and wife. Pharaoh, the despot, had no right simply to steal a man's wife if the woman pleases him, as he himself realizes. Abram, as brother, is treated as a man in charge of Sarai's sexuality. Typically, in the ancient Near East, a woman's reproductive capacity was controlled by a particular man, whether father, brother, or husband. Here, as in the Dinah story, a special role is envisioned for a brother.
Okay, so there's several things going on here that the women's story points out, but first we want to back up. The traditional reading of this is Avram is fearful that Sarah will be taken advantage of. So he is somehow trying to protect her by passing off as his sister, and it backfires. But it doesn't make any sense because everybody benefits from this except Pharaoh in the story. So the women's commentary has said that these stories actually, especially the two that involve Abraham and Sarai, in both cases they come out better at the end of the story than they were initially. They were in on it together in order to swindle Pharaoh. They're like, pulling a Bonnie and Clyde on Pharaoh, sort of, except, instead of bank robbery with Tommy guns, they're sort of sending Sarah in undercover, and Abraham's making a deal to get all this stuff. And then God does his part by smiting Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh's so upset he just sends him away already with the stuff that they already had.
Which presumably was a price.
Presumably, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what you would do, right?
Let me read the rest of what it says about this. There's the verse that says, "Please say that you're my sister."
Mm-hmm.
The request is polite, so it's asked rather than ordered.
Yes.
Also makes it sound like, I guess she's in on it. As Abram anticipated, beautiful Sarai is transported to Pharaoh's harem, and wealth is transferred to Abram. An exchange of a woman has taken place. The trickster's economic status has increased explicitly because of Sarai. Although Abraham and Sarai are willing to overlook her predicament for his sake, God intervenes to protect her, another sign that she is crucial to God's plans. The plagues upon the Egyptians here prefigure the plagues of the Exodus, but without the latter's world-altering significance. The trickster never fully succeeds in emerging from his marginal status. Revelation of the deception brings a new reduction in status. This is about take her and be gone.
Mm-hmm.
So I always kind of thought from reading this before that this was, from our presentism point of view, this was a terrible, unethical thing that they did. Never thought about them of being in this together.
Yeah. The rabbis, though, have a great deal of difficulty with the lie.
Yeah.
Tradition, there's all kinds of torrid things about how it's
Yeah.
legitimate to refer to Sarai as his sister.
Because we
Yeah.
don't Abraham as a liar.
Yeah.
That's not his big imagery. Yeah. All of the patriarchs have a very distinct rabbinic image. I guess that's the best word, but they have certain qualities, they have certain names of endearment. So Abraham's names of endearment are my precious one, and there's a second one that's slipping my mind. But like Moses, has his names of endearment, and even Isaac has names of endearment. So we build up this mythos around these characters, and then when we have stories that challenge them, when it challenges Abraham as the truthful, Abraham as the host, the great hospitality, the humble person who is so free with hospitality. When we challenge these rabbinic archetypes, they get really creative.
It could be, that here you see something that should supplement what you said about this archaeologist before. That yes, there may have been existing old stories on patriarchs, and yes, they did leave intact a lot of information about how the cult was done. But nevertheless, there could have been redaction.
Oh, absolutely.
Here you have redaction. And you might have redaction also, by the way, in the name of God here.
I think there's always
There
reduction.
is
I think
redaction. There is
reduction.
always redaction, but this was light hand redaction. If you assume then that the process simply was, okay, we leave these old stories intact as much as we can,
Right.
but we will change where it's really crucial.
Mhm.
And one place it was crucial was the name of God. Another one where it was crucial was not to present Abraham as a swindler.
Right.
See, in ancient poetry, say, well, in the Odyssey, in ancient Scandinavian poetry, they have no compunction at all to present the hero as a swindler.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Need be, that shows how clever he was.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's
Essex, he was swindling people who were bad guys, and that's in his favor.
Sure. Yeah, Aaron.
well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of the culture of the Eastern Bazaar, who can swindle whom
Yeah.
the most. But I was thinking, it's sort of along the line. I mean, I like that commentary that the two were in which case Sarai is not a victim, but is really one of the two witnesses here. And I mean, you can continue to think about David and Goliath. They were all big and mighty, and you get this little shepherd boy who has a sling and wins.
Mhm.
So, and the same with the youngest son always winning. It's like things aren't necessarily set; they only go the way that God wants them to go.
Well, I also think about, I just think David is a despicable individual who sends Bathsheba's husband off to get her killed so he can.
Oh, yeah.
And
He's not a perfect man.
no,
No.
I think that this swindler story only works if you either ignore or agree to a later redactor the line that Abraham gives to his wife, saying, if you are presented as my wife, they will kill me. It is for my sake.
Yes.
All this is happening. And that does not make the he kind of swindler at all. This makes her the center of his life.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
And you gotta make up your mind whether this is swindle or whether this is a life-preserving
I mean,
act.
one of the elements that can defend the line issue, although we don't have the full text, is you have to remember that terminology for relationships is different in pure patriarchal society. The term sister or brother really means a pro-sex member of the same generation on your father's side. So you would refer to your paternal female cousin as your sister. The word would be the same, with differentiation.
Yeah, but when the excuse comes, this really is my so-called sister, it's half-sister.
but
Well, that's
clearly,
another religion.
I mean, he's making.
Right,
Yeah.
he's making the sons up, and
She's
Well,
watching.
it doesn't matter
One
what,
true if. Yeah.
right, it doesn't matter what Abraham picks that's not husband. He
Uh-huh.
could pick brother, he could pick father.
He's still at least
he
lying
could
by
pick,
concealment.
he could
Yeah.
pick whatever.
Yeah.
If he is the most immediate
Right.
of age
Then he's
male
in control.
related to Sarai,
Yeah.
then he is in control
Right.
and he has legal standing
Right.
to act on her behalf.
And so
Okay,
he
so.
receives the
No, we
prize.
we can negatively think about this. I mean, it's probably somewhere in the middle, but on the one hand, it's like, a woman can't make a legal decision on herself. You can't, for example, unbind an oath without a male present. You can't sign a document without a male present to also sign the document. But on the other hand, there has to be a male figure in order to oversee safety on these transactions. I don't know if it's one way or the other, but it's somewhere in between two things, probably. So whether, the point is Abraham is not her husband, because then there would be restrictions on what Sarai is allowed to do, obviously. But if he's the brother, the father, or, cousin or whatever, then all of a sudden, not only is Sarai now free, but Abraham is there to oversee transactions that will get him however many camels and goats it was. Because Sarai could not have brokered that deal alone unless it was a very unique circumstance. So Abraham would have been involved in making that deal. It's not like, Abraham would have stayed in the tent and Sarai goes in and brokers the deal with Pharaoh. I mean, her most immediate male benefactor, ideally the father, but a brother works too, would have had to have been there to see this deal go through. And this is, something that we see, a lot in the ancient Near East and in Canaan, not as much necessarily.
Well, and it's
The deal is a byproduct.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because the
But like, there would
alternative
have Sarah needed a male to broker
To receive
rights
it.
and to receive it.
Yeah.
Because the alternative was he dies, she becomes the Pharaoh's throne, and all is
Anyways.
lost.
Right.
The other thing that people are uncomfortable with, which is dealt with much more clearly in the second version of the story,
Mhm.
is whether or not there actually is any sex between Pharaoh and
Yes.
Sarah.
Right, but
Absolutely.
she's in her.
Here, the feeling, kind of, without saying one way or the other, is that there is.
Yeah.
In the episode with Abimelech, they're very clear that there's
Yes.
not.
Right, here it's not
Yeah.
clear that
Yeah.
The rabbi man.
The fact is that there's room to
Yeah.
go either way.
Yeah.
You could say that a bride price was paid, there would have been a ceremony that would have involved consummation. Or you could say, in verse 16, on account of her wealth for Avram, he comes into sheep and cattle and donkeys and servants and female donkeys and camels. And then the next thing that happens
How
is
immediately then.
Pharaoh gets plagued by God. And so that timing came
Yeah.
between settlement on the bride price
Yeah,
and consummation. So therefore, Sarai came out clean, so to speak.
Wouldn't that was my argument. I wonder what the issue was.
Oh my gosh. So another question about this, we're in Genesis, when we're in any book, but it's oftentimes even more clear in Genesis. Sometimes we talk about meta-narrative and distinct literary units. So, if there's no whiteboard in here, is there? So if you can think of like several blocks, like this is a block, and it's a block, and this is a block, and these are all independent stories. This is the Tower of Babel, this is, right. So this is the flood story, this is the Tower of Babel, and this is Abraham and Sarai pull one over on Pharaoh. The meta-narrative is what sort of fits like a fork between these independent stories and bridges them together into this overarching, forward-moving plot. Right? So some things are really clearly distinct literary units, like the Tower of Babel. It's in there. It is an ideology that tells us why there are more than one language, and that's what it does. It doesn't really move the plot forward very much. This story, what do you think? Is this moving the plot forward, or is this sort of an aside that we could take out and the greater narrative of Abraham going to Israel, to Egypt, wouldn't be affected? Because the next place we're going is definitely not distinct literary units, because it's all setting up for stuff that happens in the next portion anyway.
Well, this explains in part where he got all the stuff.
Some of his stuff. We already know that he took all of his wealth that he
That's
had
true.
from
Then he got more stuff.
So but now he definitely has more stuff. And,
So we need more room.
Very well.
yeah, and I'm not sure how much stuff he had. They use the word wealth. Abraham
Yeah.
took, and the verb, so the noun for wealth and the verb for amassing wealth is the same word. So it literally says all of the wealth he wealthed,
Yeah.
he took with him.
Yeah.
But we don't really know how much it was. This is clear, this is a lot.
It may be important that part of that wealth was people.
It's Yes, it is. And they're mentioned
so
separately.
later on, it moved the story because now we understand what he could become a military commander
Right.
later on. I mean,
Well,
We
because
also
to
understand
do
how
that,
Makar got in the story.
to do that, you have to have below the ground.
Absolutely.
Although that occurs in the Haran, it's a two, and all the, and there's always discussion about what that word is. It's literally all the people that he and Sarah Assad
Right.
made, created. I mean, I always like converted, but, you know, people who joined him in their religious faith. But whatever it was, it could have been slaves, it could have been hangers on.
Right.
Your clients, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, these were, say, thinking in terms of faith and time.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's keep going. We're now in 13, correct? Ann, you want to lead us on?
Chapter 13, Genesis. So Abram went up out of Egypt with his wife and his substance, and Lot with him into the wilderness. Now Abram was very rich in cattle and in silver and gold. Therefore he proceeded on to the place from which he had come into the wilderness, even unto Bethel, the place where his tent formerly was, between Bethel and Agai, to the place of the altar which he had built there at the first. And there Abram invoked the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who accompanied Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, so the land would not admit of their living together. Because their substance
Right,
was
because
great.
between the two, they have so much livestock that they can't be on the same land because they run out of grass.
Yeah.
How did Lot get all this stuff?
Maybe he had
He
a sister wife.
probably brought all of his stuff with him too. You know, Lot is now moving from this person who Avram brought with him,
Right.
you know, to an independent figure. We're learning information about him, and we are going to, we are now, this is starting to set up the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which happens in next week's parsha, but the setup is starting here, and it's a long setup.
Right, and continues on to discredit the Moabites, et cetera, because they're all
lots of
ancestors of
lots of, yeah. And this is now definitely meta-narrative, right? This is greater plot. So we could have gone, Abraham, there was a famine, he and all of his people and all of his stuff went to Egypt. Bam, from Egypt, they went to the Negev, you know, apparently the famine is not as bad anymore, whatever. But we wouldn't have even known that there was this sister-wife narrative.
Right.
Now, that does not mean it was inserted. Does it mean it could have been inserted? Maybe, but it doesn't mean that it was. I mean, think of regular literature that we read. There are so many times when I read novels and there's this whole aside story and I finish it and I'm like, well, my God, that was 4 chapters I really didn't need to read because nothing changed and it was a completely self-contained story. So that already happens when one author writes a true narrative. So it does not mean that it's inserted by any means. And especially since it's a continuous motif, right? It even has even more weight. But it's definitely, I would say, counts as a distinct literary unit. It is a self-contained story amongst this sort of meta-narrative of Abraham and Lot moving around.
Is your idea then that the meta-narrative was created by the redactors?
That is, I wouldn't call it my idea, because I learned it, I didn't think this, you know, but that is the idea, is that the Bible was this construction to contain our people's stories and histories, and it consists of some very long stories and some very short self-contained stories, and they were all fit together by creating a meta-narrative and then fitting in the stuff that was in the narrative, meta-narrative, as these independent stories. This is one way to look at how you construct Bible. This is one of the theories that scholars think was used or may have been
It fits
used.
with what we know from elsewhere. I mean, somebody did that.
Yeah.
I mean, Snorri, we know names of these people sometimes. I mean, the guy who put together the Edda, we know who he was. And he put together a lot of stuff that otherwise, but what he did was to create a meta-narrative. Maybe it hanged together.
Yeah. I mean, you want to feel like the plot's moving forward sometimes.
That's a major accomplishment, too.
One of the things that biblical criticism and scholars regard as a little bit more proof that something happened or his story that's been around is if it does indeed show a different side or kind of an embarrassment, so that Abram is not being truthful, a different side of his character that maybe would have been more convenient to forget, but they
Right.
couldn't leave out.
Yeah, more like, and it's interesting because
More likely true, yes.
a lot of our books are not concerned with letting our people be human, but some books are concerned with image more than others. So like, here's something that we could do. Reading Kings and Chronicles in parallel is crazy because all of the juicy, nasty stuff that happens in Kings is taken out for Chronicles, and it covers the same rulers. You know, so like all the Beersheba stuff with David, you know, that's not going to be in Chronicles because Chronicles wants David to be this clean monarchy who started.
The
you know,
spin doctor worked on
absolutely.
Chronicles.
So, but you know, we've got definitely the good and the bad in Genesis. There's no question about it. Let's keep going.
Yeah, was
I think like
because the
6 or 7.
substance was great and the land did not admit of their living together,
There you go.
and there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites then inhabited that land. Therefore, Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no quarreling between me and thee, and between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we are brethren. Behold, is not the whole land before thee? Separate from me. If thou incline to the left, I will take the right, or if thou go to the right, I will go to the left." Then Lot raised his eyes and took a view of all of the country bordering on the Jordan. For before God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, it was all watered till it reached Zagorah, like the paradise of God and like the Egypt.
This is the Dead Sea area currently. So that statement just said, before there was the Dead Sea where nothing would grow and nothing could live, it was great. Okay.
Okay. Like the language. So Lot chose for himself all the country bordering on the Jordan, and Lot removed to the eastern border. And the brothers separated one from the other. And Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the city of the borderers, and pitched his tent among the Sodomites. The men of Sodom were wicked and very great sinners in the sight of the Lord. And God said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, "Raise thy eyes and look from the place where thou now art, to the north and the south and east and west. For all the land thou seest I will give to thee and thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed like the dust of the earth. If any can count the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed be numbered. Arise and travel through the land, the length and breadth thereof. For to thee I will give it, and to thy seed forever." Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt near the oak of Mamre, which was by Hebron, and built there an altar to the Lord.
Okay. So, verses, let's see, where
Starts at
14 through 17 is, this is covenant. Get the covenant a few times. The covenant is restated again after
Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac. God rewards him the covenant God already gave him anyway. So here it is. I'm going to talk about the Abraham covenant.
This is the Abraham covenant. It's very much the peoplehood covenant. You will become a great nation. Lech Lecha, the Lech Lecha poem has pieces of the covenant in there. You know, blessing you, making your name great, making your nation great. And this is, you know, all this is the land and the people who fill the land. And that's the covenant. And Abraham's side of the covenant was, what did he do at the beginning of the portion? before that he left. He left. So, but it gets more complicated, right? Because by the time you get to Moses, then you have commandments.
Yeah.
But to start out, right, to start out, it's like, just leave. You know, if you are willing to blindly go somewhere that I tell you to go, I will give you this really great deal. And
Was it necessary to get rid of Lot, to make it a covenant?
Well, there's a practical issue, which is the herds issue, but also
Right.
that's part of the whole background of this leading up into the Torah study.
Yeah.
That section is Lot, and therefore the Moabites and Ammonites who descend from Lot. They had the choice. They took the stuff to the south that is not the land of Canaan,
right.
given to Abraham. So they have abandoned that portion.
And Lot is not part of the covenant, really. I mean, he's related to Abraham, but he's not really a it's not clear how much of a Hebrew Lot is, right? So I think, I had not thought about this, but there may be to the fact that the covenant comes after Lot leaves and not before Lot leaves. Because imagine if they're both sitting around in the same part of Negev, and God says, look around, everything that you see will be yours. And Abraham says, well, I can understand conquering the Canaanites because they are clearly heathen, non-Yahwist people. But Lot's my nephew. I mean, when he's not so bad. He could be Yahwistic too, you know. But now Lot's like way over in the Jordan plain, so he's not part of this picture that God is saying, look, you know, this is like Simba. Everything that you see will be yours, except that shady area over there. You know, like it's really.
Well, my question really is a little deeper. I was wondering why Lot in the first place. I mean, why was he?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer.
Brought in and.
Right. Why Abraham's nephew? Maybe it's because that was his main family. I mean, who?
I would look back to the chapter before we started reading to see who was the mother of Lot, and it's not in Genesis 11.
In all the so-and-so, the sons, and the
It talks
so-and-so.
about Sarah and the three sons he begot, which was Abram, Nahor, and Aaron. And Aaron begot Lot. But it does not say, we know who the wife of Abram is, and we know who the wife of Nahor, but we do not know who the wife
Who
of
the mother
Aaron
was.
was.
Yeah, they frequently don't tell that.
The women's commentary says that the separation between Lot and Abram were amicable. It says the amicable separation, even though it's in
Yeah,
poorly
it's certainly, I mean, and
distinction
Abraham
one
says,
from
you go
another.
this way, I'll go that way, you want to go that way, I'll go this way.
This is-
Abraham,
No, I
This
think
is
it's
common.
more- yeah,
Go ahead.
I think it's more important than that. This is the basis of the principle of fairness. I've taught ethics courses where everybody understands that without measuring anything, one person divides, the other chooses.
Yeah.
Okay, Abraham divides and Lot chooses, and both of them are happy. That's why it's an amicable thing, because
Yeah.
nobody's been cheated, nobody undercut. Okay, and this is the Abraham principle of fairness, if you like.
Did Lot make bad decisions?
And this is
But
the,
this is when you get, you know, two siblings and one divides the piece of cake and the
Yeah.
other
They
chooses.
kept, do you think they put Lot into the story in order to?
I don't know, but,
Look at the principle
but
in
this
industry.
is an important definition.
Oh, it is, I mean, for the reader, yes, but I mean for the,
Well, for the storyteller as well, how do you resolve a dispute amicably?
yeah. And it may be an example for that purpose, because again, patriarchal herding society, this is a common event.
This is,
Clan splits when it overruns its resources.
right.
And as we'll see, you still have obligations to the other half.
Yes.
They're still your relative,
right.
but you have to split at some point
You have to
because the land won't support you.
Right.
And this may simply be,
This
since
is-
it's all the time, this is how you do
This
it.
is how you do it if you're going to not
Yeah,
get violent.
Burn your bridges.
yeah. Oh, it's considered
Yeah.
more polite under those circumstances to
Yeah.
take the smaller piece if you can. Lot 30 is not, but that's.
in that kind of visionary kingdom, you have obligations for the other outfits. For instance, you can mobilize them on your side.
Absolutely, exactly.
Yeah.
Good place to find a bride.
Fairness.
Yeah, find out.
That was when I was bigger than.
All right, I want to keep going.
Yeah.
I like the ethics part. I try to figure out who Lot's mother is, but I don't see anything. So I mean, I think it's just, this is Abraham's nephew, grandson of Abraham's father, so they're in the same clan. But, Lot's parents just aren't really much in the way of, they're just not that important in the
There was
story.
some kind of principle, I think, also that if you have a story that you're trying to incorporate into your corpus here, if it seemed, if a part of the story seemed important to whoever came up with the story, then you kept it.
Yes.
You didn't redact
And
it
there are
out.
some things that are cut because they're just popular.
They're just
So
popular,
even if
yeah.
it doesn't fit your agenda,
You keep it.
if it's really popular, you can't get rid of it. Kol Nidre, Kol Nidre is an example of that. The rabbis wanted to get rid of Kol Nidre like 700 years ago, but they couldn't. And we keep trying to get rid of it because no one really likes the text because the text is uncomfortable. I don't want to get on a huge, but it stays because congregants love the melody. We loved it. We loved the Kol Nidre prayer. I mean, that's like Yom Kippur. You can't get rid of Kol Nidre. So, but the same thing could have happened in the biblical text. That stories that did not fit necessarily the redactor's plan still had to be in there because they're crucial, love stories by the people who tell them. So let's keep going, and let's just burn through some of this text. I want to get to the section where Abraham is up in military contextualization.
In the time of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Ariel, king of Elasa, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. These four waged war against Zerah, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shimad, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and king of Bela, king of Zoar. These all joined towards the valley of Siddim, now the Dead Sea. For 12 years they had been subject to Chedorlaomer. In the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and his allied kings came and subdued the Rephaim and Antar-Kanaim, the Zuzim and Ham, the Emim and Shevek, Kiriataim, and the Horites and their hill country of Seir, as far as Hail Paran by the edge of the wilderness. They then returned unto Mishpat, that is Kadesh, where they subdued the whole country of Amalek and the Amorites who dwelt in the Zazon Mar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and arrayed them. What did I just say? Went out and arrayed themselves in battle formation against the enemy in the valley of Siddim, against Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goyim, Amr, king of Shinar, and Ariel, king of Eleazar. 4 kings against 5.
Okay.
You said when we
Great reading. Excellent reading. So there are, believe it or not, there are some very important things going on here. The first thing is that it's a great example of bad narratives of the ancient Near East. Like, the Assyrians were this was how they wrote. I mean, there are tablets and tablets and tablets and tablets and tablets and tablets that say nothing but in the so-and-so who followed so-and-so, he conquered so-and-so, and in the 4th year, he allied with so-and-so to conquer so-and-so and so-and-so. And it's amazing, he never lost. Whoever they're writing about never lost because they don't record that part, they just record the victories. They record the alliances, and especially if you went up outnumbered. So if you were 2 kings against 3 allied kings, that was even more important to emphasize. You have to put that here because you were outnumbered king for king, whether or not you were troops on the ground.
But you won nevertheless.
And you won nevertheless, exactly. And it reads just like this. So if there was, we mentioned earlier, a Sefer HaMilchama or Nai, whatever, of some, the book of the wars of the Lord, it would probably have been a document that would read like this. It would have been a list of battles.
Which makes you think, frankly, because of the lack of content otherwise, that there is probably some kind of historicity to this, to preserve all of this detail.
It would have definitely been much easier to have had a scholar who could read various texts, pick up a tablet about these rulers and just write it and copy it, rather than make up, it's almost unimaginable, to make a bunch of names and locations and kings and allegiances. It seems like it would have been much easier to just say all of these things as they happen. And the point is, look at all of, these are not rulers unfamiliar with war. These are battle-tested rulers with battle-tested armies. That is something that's very important that the text wants us to know, because we'll put into context, even greater context, what Abraham does. Go ahead.
Yeah, well,
I want to do this narrative first.
Now the valley of Siddim was set with tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some tumbled into them, and the rest into the hills. So they took all the possessions of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and their food, and they went off. And as they went off, they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, with his possessions. He was a resident of Sodom. A fugitive.
So these people, in the fight, so the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah flung themselves into these in their flight, Then others escaped into the hills. The invaders seized all of the possessions. So who is stronger, the invaders or the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah? The answer is the invaders.
Right, and we took Lot.
And the invaders are the ones with Lot. Okay, so we got to keep the who's better than who in our minds. All right, we'll keep going.
A fugitive then came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oak trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and Aner, who were allied to Abram by treaty. Hearing that his kinsman had been taken captive, Abram mustered his retainers born into his household, 318 of them, going in pursuit as far as Dan. At night he deployed himself and his forces against them and defeated them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He brought back all the possessions, his nephew Lot too, and his possessions, the women too, and the other people. The king of Sodom came out to meet him after his return to the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley, from fighting Kedorlaomer and his allied kings. Now Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High, and blessed him, saying, Blessed be Abram, God Most High, maker of heaven and earth. Blessed is God Most High, who has given your foes into your hands. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything.
Let's get through verse 24.
The king of Sodom said to Abram, Let me have the people and keep the good yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the eternal God Most High, maker of heaven, that I would take nothing of yours, not even a thread or sandal strap. You shall not say, I enriched Abram, except what the troops have eaten, and the share due the leaders who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their share.
Okay, so invaders come to Sodom and Gomorrah, they overpower them, Sodom and Gomorrah leadership flees. Abraham beats the invaders that Sodom and Gomorrah couldn't beat. Therefore, Abraham is militarily stronger than the rulers of Sodom and Gomorrah. Mm-hmm. That follows?
Right, yes.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure that we had that context really clear. What do people think about this?
Is this a new king of Sodom? Because the previous one fell on a truck.
Or is this a guy covered with tar?
Yeah.
Right.
Because it doesn't say that he died, so.
He just get tarred and feathered.
Kind of the
Right, that's
implication,
anyway.
Anyway.
Now, the invaders who succeeded to control Sodom and Gomorrah, and those are the ones that
No, they took the possessions and went off. Doesn't say they occupied them.
And Abraham plays cool. You know, we did not hear God tell Abraham, you are not allowed to take any booty from Sodom and Gomorrah because they're terrible non-Yahwists and they're evil people and heathens, so you're not allowed to take any of their tainted stuff. We haven't heard that. We'll hear things like that later in the Bible, but we didn't hear it here. But Abraham doesn't take anything. So maybe there's something going on here. You know, maybe Abraham knows that he shouldn't take this stuff because it's tainted. Right? However, his allies, he makes sure that they get their fair share. You know, because you expect as conquerors to take a certain portion, and he says, you know, make sure they get theirs, but no one's going to be able to say that, you know, the Sodomites, you know, were the ones who made me rich. Okay, so that's definitely important. What about this situation with a non-Israelite blessing Abraham?
Oh, that's just,
Yeah. How well timed was that to be in the same portion as this whole thing about
People who bless you will be blessed, and all the other nations will bless them by you, and you will be a blessing to others when they bless you. So we've actually got that going on right here.
This also is the model for the righteous Gentile. I mean, Melchizedek, literally the righteous king.
Mm-hmm. Yes, quite literally.
Yeah, who it looks like is worshiping at least a more or less monotheistic God, even though not given the same name as the Tetragrammaton, but actually a name that is, on other occasions, applied to Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
So, exactly what it is or who it is that Melchizedek worships is of interest.
Right, yeah, just use generic word for God. Baruch Avraham El Elyon.
Yeah, so that is actually the name of Canaanite God. It's not.
Yeah. Well, as a generic word for God.
So I want to share one of Rashi's commentaries that I looked at earlier that I thought was hilarious. When we look at verse 14, when Abram learned that his kinsman Lot had been captured, he called up his retainers, brought into his household, in the number of 318, and gave chase far as Dan. So,
Of course, Dan wasn't Dan then.
no, it wasn't. It would have been just someplace.
Yeah.
So this is Rashi's comment on his trained men. This is Eliezer, whom Abraham had trained to perform the commandments, because for the rabbis and the medieval commentators, Abraham, having not known the commandments, even though they haven't been given yet, is unthinkable. So God must have already told Abraham all the commandments. So Eliezer is his trained man, because the training was not military, the training was training in commandments. Okay? This gets better. So it is an expression of the initiation of a person or a utensil to the craft in which it is designed to remain. Similarly, in English Proverbs, you train a child, dedication of an altar, the dedication of the temple. So this is, he's moving this word to train and putting it in a context that moves closer towards what you would train in the sense of learning commandments. We're learning religious rites. Now, the next comment is even better.
Are you doing the numerology?
Yes.
Okay.
318. Our sages said, this is from Genesis Rabbah, that it was Eliezer alone. So the only person that went against all this military stuff was Eliezer. Because Eliezer's name has a numeric value of 318. So the rabbis are now saying that this wasn't Abraham as a general with 300 some odd people. And 318, is an odd number. We'll talk about that in a second. Because numbers are always weird in the Bible. 318 is pretty weird. But it wasn't 318 people with Abraham as the leader. It was Eliezer who went in, whooped up all these bad guys, got Lot, all the people, and all the stuff, and brought them all out. So that's Rashi's comment. I just thought it was too good to not share.
Clark's got a little more on the 318.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. It says, first of all, it's also found in the description of the retinue of a tiny princess. In the Iliad, the number of men killed in a specific battle is 318.
Oh, good.
And the number is 318 is the total of all prime numbers between 7 and 49. 7 times 7.
The Women's commentary has nothing to say about that number.
Oh, numbers, let's just talk about numbers in general in the Bible. Certain numbers come up a lot, they seem to have power. 7 definitely has power. 7 days of the week, 7 is a good number. 40 is another good number to use in the Bible. It means an extended 40 years in the desert, 40 days and nights rain. It's a lot, whether it's in years or whether it's in days. 40 is a fair chunk of time. And then you have, like the numbers of people who rebel at the golden calf, and it's whatever thousands or myriads. And then you have numbers of people who rebel in numbers. And then you have the sizes of these military forces in Joshua, which are these huge numbers. So a lot of times you'll hear, the text will say 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000. And they don't mean 100,000 people. They don't mean 1,000 people. They mean a whole lot of people. Or a whole lot of people. the numbers aren't there to be specific, that's why they're not, specific
But
numbers. Like in the census in numbers, it's not, and there were 7,428 people in the tribe, or whatever, at the counting of, it's, usually numbers that mean various degrees of a whole bunch. And so when you have a number like 318, you wonder, why 318? Why not 320? Why not 300? 300's easy, so it's weird, and it could be this weird prime number thing, although I have definitely not heard that one before.
Yeah, it's in play here in.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
So, it's really, anything you can come up with may be feasible, but it's 300, why 318? Who knows?
It's all providential.
Yeah.
Because it's Zechariah's name. Eliezer, right.
Let's look at this blessing 19, and if you have Hebrew, look at the Hebrew too.
Okay.
So this is in chapter 13 or 14.
Yeah, it's in 14. Baruch Abraham Latot Elyon.
Kaneh Shemayim.
That's, yeah. Uberach Abel Elyon.
So we want to look at, where is it? Oh, this is 19, verse 19. I'm looking at the wrong.
Yeah,
So,
verse 19.
so Baruch Abraham La'el Elyon.
Yeah.
So blessed is Abraham to El Elyon. This is, the Lord of Lords, the God of gods, or just El Elyon is a title for God, but it's not Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, it's El. But the frame is more important. So El Elyon, Koneh Shamayim Va'aretz, the one who formed or created the heavens and the earth. So, whenever we talk about, even in our current liturgy, if we want to tie God to creation, it's always heaven and earth, going back from the dualistic creation narrative in Genesis 1, where, you separated the waters above and the waters below, and there was a rift. So, and then it continues, Uvaruch El Elyon, so, continuing to be praised by the same title for God, El Elyon, right? Asher Migain Sarecha Biyadecha. Right? Sarecha, your adversary, your enemy, Biyadecha, into your hands. So the imagery is very strong. The one who delivered your enemies into your hand. And you can just imagine, crushing them in your hand. I mean, that imagery is completely here. And so that's it. It's actually kind of weird that the blessing is where it's divided verse. But this is an excellent example of the construct of a blessing in the Bible. And when the rabbis had to create, liturgy was early on created, the construct didn't move very far. I mean, the Motzi is not far off from this format. Blessed is God who does whatever just happened. So in the case of the Motzi, it's blessed is God who brings bread from the earth. And after a military victory, it's Baruch El Elyon, blessed is God, Asher Migain Sarecha Biyadecha, who delivered our enemies into our hands. So this is the thank you form of praising God. Blessed is God for blank what God just did, and the imagery it's for helping us win, not just for helping us win. It's a heightened level of speech for delivering our enemies into our hand. For bringing forth bread from the earth. It's not thank you God for the food on the table. It's bringing forth bread from the earth, delivering the enemies into our hand.
So God is really active participant.
God's an active. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could get into a whole, discussion on. I'm pretty sure we've had it before anyway. Just exactly how gods are involved in the ancient Near Eastern understanding of warfare. Because you have your family protector God, and your clan protector God, and your city protector God. So if somebody else comes in with their God and they beat your God, then clearly their God was stronger than your city's God, because they see this conflict happening on a level of multiple divine personalities. Which is why when Jerusalem and Israel gets destroyed in Babylonian exile, the book of Lamentations is written portraying God as the one who used the other nations to punish us. Are there any other questions with this story or with the blessing or military aspect of this? Comments? All right, let's keep going. We are now in, what is this, 15? Oh, who's in back here?
Sometime later, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision.
All right, so sometime later is code for in a different and unrelated series of events that is not directly connected with what just happened for it. Okay, that's a literary term. It should be like a flag for us. Sometimes later means new story. All right, make next somehow the new story.
Fear not, Abram. I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what can you give me, seeing that I shall die childless, and the one in charge of my household is a domestic, Eliezer. Abram said further, since you have granted me no offspring, my steward will be my heir. The word of the Lord came to him in reply, that one shall not be your heir. None but your very own issue shall be your heir. He took him aside and said, look toward the heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he added, so shall your offspring be. And because he put his trust in the Lord, he reckoned to him to his merit. I think in Hebrew is righteousness there.
Yes. Okay, this is a good place to stop. A couple things will be none other than your own issue, but as of yet, Sarai is not a part of this promise or foretelling by God. So God did not say, through the child of you and Sarah, just through your child. So Hagar is looking like a good option right now. Who has, also, this is, sand counting is the sands of the sea, now it's the stars above. The way this question and answer happens seems like either maybe so much time has gone by between the first time that God told Abraham that you would give birth to a great nation that would be very numerous. Enough time has gone by to where Abraham seems to have forgotten the promise, or at least wants reassurance maybe. Or this is a different narrative that wanted to also include that promise in the context of the story that it's telling, right? Because we have the sometime afterward, so we know it's its own story anyway. So they want that story in here too. So think about it. If you just read this chapter, you would still have that promise here versus needing to read, a couple chapters ago, a chapter to get the full picture. Okay, so there's definitely, whenever you see repetition that close, but yet in different mini narratives, it's something to about. Anyone have a Damascus comment? A comment on Damascus in verse, what was it, 2?
What the Septuagint says is, the son of Masek, my servant, Damascus Eliezer.
Right. I've got one in
Ben-Hashad is here in my household to play on Ben-Hashad, coming from Damascus.
Right.
This says, we said in verse 2,
So the Anchor Bible has that the clause itself contains in all probability an internal gloss, deliberate wordplay on Ben Masek, which would be a son of someone from Damascus, and the just straight up place name Damascus, which is the title Damascus, which they put as the important being non-Semitic. This is a non-Semitic place of origin.
there's nothing in here about
So,
more about.
etymologized in here, blah, blah, blah. Like fascist. So, Eliezer apparently Damascene by birth, only other prospective heir. And they go on to say that, so the emphasis would probably be that the only person on the table currently to be an heir is someone who isn't even Semitic. He's from somewhere else. Much less, he's not related to Abraham, but he's not even the same people of Abraham.
And we talk about Eliezer? Yeah.
Well, the Jewish
Eliezer is a Damascus.
the Jewish study line has it that he may have been adopted by
Yeah.
Abraham.
And he certainly seems to be. It hasn't been made clear yet, and I can't remember if it gets made totally clear what the relationship between Abraham and Eliezer is, but it certainly seems Eliezer is a prominent member of the household. So he could be, something akin to a clerk, someone who is not.
Steward.
Yeah, steward, chief steward.
Chief steward.
Yeah, that's how
Yeah.
that's how we-
So, that person would be very close and have a role that's a sort of interesting gray area between a servant or an employee, but also someone who wields significant power and has control over others.
But it's pretty
under
clear
them.
that Abram just, he's complaining to God, it's pretty clear that regardless of what his relationship was with Eliezer, he doesn't want him to inherit anything.
No.
No, Abram doesn't.
Well,
No, Abram says that since you will grant me no food, my steward will be my heir.
He says, yeah, you give me no
But he's
offspring,
not
and
happy
my
about
slaves, but he's not happy about it.
No, that's
And
true.
No, it
Commentary
doesn't seem
here
true.
says, Abram confronts God, calling attention to the grand yet unfulfilled promises of progeny. Abram has not yet resorted to the variety of customs in ancient times that enabled householders to ensure their posterity, such as taking an additional wife. So this commentary says Abram confronts God, so we assume he's not happy with the things that turned out.
Okay. Let's keep going, Aaron, with the rest of this chapter, or through 21.
Okay, taking him out, God said, turn your gaze toward the heavens and count the stars, you can count them. God promised him, so shall your seed be. And he put his trust in the Eternal, reckoned that as loyalty in him, saying to him, I am the Eternal, who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as an inheritance. He then said, Eternal God, how can I know that I shall take possession of it? God answered, bring me a 3-year-old calf, a 3-year-old kid, a 3-year-old ram, and a young turtle dove. So he took all of these and split them, all but the bird in the middle, placing each half opposite the other. Vultures descended upon carcasses, but Abram chased them away. Then, as the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and lo, a powerful dark dread was falling upon him. God said to Abram, know now that your descendants shall be strangers in a land not theirs. They shall be enslaved and afflicted for 400 years. But then will bring judgment upon the nation they are serving. After that they shall go out with many possessions. And you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried in good old age. The 4th generation shall return here, for not until then shall the iniquity of the Amorites be repaid. Sort of lost that thread. Now when the sun had set and it was dark, Lo, a smoking oven and a fiery torch were what passed between these pieces. On that day, the Eternal made a covenant.
We get that word this time.
Right.
And we had all the construct of a covenant. Abraham has to do something. Abraham does it. God will fulfill it with promise X. It's formulaic agreement. Here we actually have the word.
Right, and it's, all these animals are really split right down the middle. And I guess that's what the fiery torch passed between the halves of the animals. Is that right?
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
We'll look at whatever else we can find.
Okay, to your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's do 5 minutes on this, and then we'll spend the last 5 minutes talking about what we want to do in the future. I'll start it off. I've got a great comment in the Anchor Bible on the smoking pot and the flaming torch. So it's literally the fire pot and you've got an oven and a torch, and the torch is to keep the fire going in the fire pot. So I'm just going to read this straight out. These were not just fanciful inventions by the author or his immediate source. Both these details are recorded in various Akkadian texts pertaining to magic. They're listed together in an incantation against witches. Quotes, I send out against you repeatedly a glowing oven and a fire that has gone. The combination is almost exactly the same as in the present instance. It was evidently believed to be highly efficacious, which may explain the archaic use of oven, since no detail of an occult practice or the wording that goes with it must be served actual oven, blah, 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 like that. So they go on for a little bit, but more or less they're saying that these two items paired together in this manner had something to do with magic or a ward of evil of some sort in lots of Akkadian texts. So they propose that its use in a mystical experience in this text is not random. That contextual readers of this would have seen these are the mysterious objects or the objects for to indicate a metaphysical implementation of some kind. Here it doesn't really seem like they're warding off, witch users or evil spirits necessarily, but we certainly have Yahweh as an active person, and it's right before, a setting of the covenant. So it's definitely used in front of a very, very important piece of text.
And with the women's commentary has something completely different.
Really?
It says, smoking oven fire torch. The deity is often associated with fiery imagery. See Exodus 3:2.
That's true. Pillar of fire, pillar of smoke.
The text's ancient audience perceive certain artifacts to be associated with a particular gender. Ovens, torches, or both may well have been linked with women in particular, as those who bake bread, or as a Deborah, who is said to be affiliated with lapidot torches. Here, such items represent divine presence. So, there's an aspect of this that makes me wonder if this is some kind of, because of this falling into a deep sleep, where the women's commentary says, translates signals important transformations, like in Genesis 2:21, the human being was likewise placed in a deep sleep prior to the formation of a woman. I started thinking, well, maybe this is prior to somebody getting pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
No, so,
The origins of something in the oven.
But this is
Yeah, I
clearly,
sort of thought,
this is clearly a vision statement, yeah.
yeah. So, but this is a very different explanation than what he just
Yeah.
wrote.
And in both they refer to the split animals as referring to an 8th century treaty between an Aramean ruler and the king of Assyria. The slain animal symbolizes the fate of one who is false to the treaty.
Yeah. You also have the fact that you that you cut a covenant. In
Yes.
terms of the phrasing.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's from the same.
Yeah,
Same room.
yeah, that's in here too, somewhere else. Did you cut a deal?
Anyhow, this covenant is sanctified, definitely.
Oh, completely. And the issues of this being a vision is interesting because the nature of prophecy is actually addressed in Numbers, in this really wild story where Miriam is an instigator and sort of seems to drag her brother Aaron along to confront Moses and say, Moses, we're tired of you being God's favorite and being, the head prophet because, doesn't God all speak to us? And then God speaks to Moses.
No.
Right, but the weird is, God speaks to Moses, or God speaks to Miriam and Aaron and says, with other prophets I speak in dreams and visions, and with Moses I speak plainly like I would speak like two men, like a man and his fellows speak face to face. So what's weird is 3 verses before God says that, he just literally spoke to Miriam in dialogue, the exact same way Ayomer, Adonai El Miriam, that he always speaks to Moses. So in the same story, God speaks to Miriam as plainly as he speaks to Moses, and then says, I only speak to Moses like this. So it's weird here that, Abraham and God already have a report in the same thing where they speak face to face. So why does this covenantal thing have to happen in some kind of weird vision thing when we already had the covenant happen twice with them speaking in dialogue? So it clearly has to do with whatever imagery or strings visionary style prophecy would pull in the context of this text, that a narrative dialogue would not pull those same strings for some reason. We don't exactly know.
Perhaps the imagination in a much more profound way than.
Yeah,
There's certainly a mysteriousness in dreams.
it's a real, yeah.
I don't think that there's any reason to not think that that was the exact same a long time ago as it is now. Dreams are kind of weird. They just sort of are. And especially when we pair them, if we go with the Anchor Bible's comments on the on this sort of coal oven and the fire torch being mystic objects, then that plus a dream situation, I think it's very much supposed to be more ethereal experience than the very plain, here's the promise. So let's close off our comments now. I'm going to throw out a couple different ideas, and then I want to hear your ideas, and then hopefully we can sort of come to a consensus. 2 thoughts that I have. One is, because of the nature of the student pulpit, there aren't a lot of times where, if ever, that the book of Numbers comes up in the synagogue, because the book of Numbers only happens in the summer. So one thing we could do is we could do a reading of the book of Numbers, and because the book of Numbers so nicely has these really extended census narratives, which is why it's called Numbers, we could sort of skip the big census narratives and just hit the actual story narratives in the book of Numbers, in the priestly section of the book of Numbers, and skim, if we reference at all, the census part that can go on for several chapters at a time. Another thought that I had is, we looked, actually I have 3 thoughts, I don't know what I said 2. We looked at non-halakha midrash, either last year or the year before, and the Petichtha, right? And we painstakingly went through this format and saw how, they take the Petichtha verse and then they link it to some other things and then make a homiletic point and then they come to the verse that they're connecting these 2 verses for. So we looked at which books of Petichtha were we looking at? I can't remember. It was something in the Torah, Leviticus. We looked at Leviticus Rabbah because the stuff that's in Leviticus Rabbah is often reciting what's in Leviticus. So If we wanted to do something similar to that, Lamentations Rabbah is set up in the same way. It has the format, but Lamentations Rabbah is highly theologically charged because it is all about taking the biblical view of God and then the early rabbinic view of God, which is surrounding the destruction of the Second Temple, and taking the theology of that, making God more human. So God, has feelings, it's sad, it gets upset, and it's not just this cold Deuteronomy, I curse you when you do bad things and break the covenant, and I will bless you when you do good things and keep the covenant, and this very sort of like impersonal judging God. Deuteronomy, they really want to bring in God as an emotional character in the text. And it's unclear whether they believe that theistically or whether they want that to be the God who's in the texts, or both. So that's another option. Another option is, I don't think that we have ever looked at any strictly legal material. And that's probably my fault because I tend to gravitate towards non-legal material because it personally interests me more. But if we wanted to look at Mishnah or Gemara, or even some codes like the Shulchan Aruch or something like that, that's another option if we wanted to buckle down with some purely legal rabbinic material. So those are my three ideas. What do you guys think?
Well, in Reform, we're supposed to, before we reject anything not being relevant, we're supposed to know about it, and we seem to like to reject most of the laws, so we maybe ought to know about them.
And we got introduced, maybe it was when Dan was here, I can't remember, but anyway, we got introduced some years ago, not in great detail, to Talmud and Mishnah.
I know Daniel did that. I think he did an overview of like
I think it is
Talmud
overview,
page
this is
and
the
here's
organization,
parts, yeah.
but we never got into the text of it. I think
Okay.
more of an overview, this is what it is, this is how it's organized, this is where it came from. I think that's as far as we got, something like that.
What, in your opinion, would work best with you only being here, 8 more times?
All of these things would work well for that, because if it's numbers, what I would do is I would pick a couple, it wouldn't be going through the entire book. It would be, let's look at these narratives at the beginning the first time, and then some other narratives. With the Petichto, it would work nicely because you could do 1 or 2 Petichto per time. That would be more self-contained, but would still build from month to month. And if we did, if the best place to start with legal text really is the Mishnah, and that's pretty simple. We would want to do the first time of real basic overview for the first hour. And then I think it would be good to just pick a tractate and look at the chapters, because it's very important in the Mishnah because it's organized based on topic and content and not based on biblical order. So what comes first and what comes next and what comes after is always important in the Mishnah, because it shows how they conceptualized organizing legal material. So I think they would all work in that context, but they would definitely need to be thought about as it would be more chunks and less continuous process.
I'm interested in Mishnah just because it's nothing we ever do. I mean, I shouldn't say nothing, but it's something typically, like Aaron said, that we don't do in a Reform synagogue. The others are fine with do, so.
Okay, and also, especially if we do Mishnah, and since it's less, since the times we meet aren't as close together, it would be very easy to, instead of saying, let's do brachot, actually now that I think about it, we do like a chapter in brachot, and then a chapter in, Yoma, and we can actually hit different tractates and different books, different orders of the Mishnah, and be exposed to a lot of different types of things.
If there's something that you think would be useful, if we were going to do that, something that you think useful for us to read ahead of time, you could let Shannon or somebody know, and we could.
I could send out some stuff.
You don't actually have to do it.
And it wouldn't be something that anyone would need to read. It would be more like, if you want to look at more background stuff on not the Mishnah, but stuff about what the Mishnah is and how to read it, yeah.
I can just forward it to everybody.
Okay.
I mean,
That sounds
that's
good.
just my opinion.
I'll just send an attachment.
And we could do 3-4 things on the Mishnah and then change, and then go a different direction.
We seem to be going that way, and that's fine, but Ann had what I thought was an interesting idea.
Yeah, I was interested, would need definitely someone who, a little bit more learning to be able to do a good compare and contrast, but I'm interested in prophecy and how it's different. The prophets over here, Zechariah, and the ones that you said had such a formulaic and boring. But
It's not boring, it's just repetitive. Boring wasn't the right word to use, I don't think.
and then we've got these righteous Gentiles back in Genesis that have visions and relate them. And
Then you have roving bands of prophets and like
Yeah, but
Samuel.
the whole
and
big
Kings.
concept of the prophet.
and what's prophecy and how is it expressed at different periods during the development of the Torah?
You know, I think we could do that as like a one-session thing.
Okay.
I think we could do that as a one-session thing. So,
So we could do that and along with something else.
yeah, so,
You have to include Joseph and Balaam
right.
and,
So let's see, next
Jonah.
visit, the 11th, is a regular visit. The visit after that, on the 10th actually. The visit after that is Noah's Bar Mitzvah, so we won't meet. And so what we do, is we can have a session on just prophecy next time. And then,
we're not gonna be here next time, Sandy.
oh no! Well,
But you don't
so,
get to suggest stuff that you're not going to be here.
At the end of the year.
Yeah.
Or the holiday of December.
but the point is that that's very, very easily be done in one session.
Okay.
So we
So why
can
don't,
do-
since you suggested it, Ann, why don't you pick a date and you can let Jim,
Yeah, so that sounds
because that
fun.
was
How
how
about
to,
like the very end?
the very end.
Yeah, like May or?
Sure.
Yeah, because
That'd be
otherwise,
nice for me too, because I'm not gonna have much going on then. Unless, of course, I don't have a job yet, then I'm gonna be like
Did
crazy.
you have more time to prepare it?
Yeah.
Well, then you divide up the animals, put the two halves, and
Everyone bring their
Am I
fire
going,
torch.
after all the study, am I going to have a congregation? Yeah.
Right.
I will make her congregate numerous.
Next time we'll do, what, Mission of tomorrow?
Yeah, so next one we'll do Mishnah, and it'll first have an overview, and then we'll
Sure.
look at something like really typical. A lot of people start with the beginning of Brachot, they talk about the Shema, and it is so standard. It's like, how early can you say the Shema and it count as that day? How late can you say the Shema and it still counts as that morning? If you happen to be walking by the room and someone in that room says the Shema and you hear it, it does count for you saying, I mean, it's like so typical. It's a pretty good place to start. So we can definitely start there.
Yeah, actually, it seems to me that we did I can't remember, is arguments done later on in the Talmud with the same thing about the Shema? We did when we were looking at Talmud one time.
But there's also some like weirder things in the mid too that will be fun to look at, like,
We went over weird things.
you know, the Ben Moray Deuteronomy, you know, the 11/12-year-old kid who is so unruly that he actually gets put to death. So the Mishnah tries to bend over. The Mishnah can't stand it, and it gets really creative really quickly. There's another part which we could look at where they talk about the nature of laborers and the difference between work labor, and it's like this commentary on the nature of work. There's this philosopher called Levinas, you could look at him too, who did a treatise on it, and he takes it and puts it into this sort of socialist communist perspective, and it is interesting. So there's like some weird stuff in the Mishnah too. So I think what we'll do is we'll look at some standard things and look at some of the more oddball stuff. Okay.
Lamentation sounds interesting, getting a better understanding of the nature of God.
Yeah.
I think the
We
better
might-
we understand the nature of God, the closer we'll draw to
We
Him.
could move into that next semester too, because it'll also be a big contrast from looking at the mission too. And if we look at a little bit of Lamentations and a little bit of Lamentation Rabbah, I think that would be nice. But we can talk about that more once we've done some.
Well, if you mention it next time and maybe a time or two, then we can negotiate.
Absolutely.
You're busy next semester, right?
Yeah.
You're just finishing up, what's the big deal? Your grades are all done.
Well, we'll have